Now, the things that stand out from the cover, aside from this whole thing, is yes, this is sponsored by a cigarette company, which I can only imagine was one of those buy enough cigarettes, fill the form, and get the book. The other thing you'll notice is that yes, that is the world-famous James Beard. He was actually taking part in this, which I can only conclude was paid rather handsomely to do this. Side note, non-smoking in restaurants was kind of a novelty until about the 80s when they started transitioning to having non-smoking areas permanently. Those of you who were born in the 90s or later wouldn't be aware of this because, well, they kind of did away with smoking areas by that point. So that is something to keep in mind as you go through this book. Secondly, we have an actual foreword by Mr. James Beard himself, even with something of a signature there. So, there you go. See if I can get... There we go. If you want to read all of that, enjoy. Now, alongside this photograph of the latter years, James Beard himself, we also have this note saying that he has given measurements for salt and pepper and to use unsalted butters for the recipe. So, at least it's helpful in that respect. Now, once again, we're just going to be covering the highlights here, starting right up on page 1 with shrimp remoulade. Something you tend not to see in restaurants at all. But it is an artful presentation, and you at least have a decent idea as to what remoulade sauce is, which helps. Next, we have escargot. So, if you really want to make escargot at home, this book can provide that for you. But you really gotta want to make it on your own. Next up, we don't have a photo for it, but we do have, sorry, I don't speak Tunisian, so I can't really pronounce that. My apologies, but it does at least tell you what the translation is, if that's of any help to you. Next, we have a trio of things you tend not to see very much. And from representing Scotland, we have, appropriately enough, maybe Scotch broth, stracciatella romana from Italy, and oyster puree from the States. Yeah. Next, from the British Isles, with an accompanying photograph, we have jellied veal. My apologies to those of you with weak constitutions. Next, we have a French recipe. Sorry, I took Japanese and Spanish in high school. Otherwise, if I'd known I was going to kill anything, I probably would have taken French, but here we are. But translated, it's chicken with 40 cloves of garlic. Something I imagine is on some menus today, but not many. Next up, from Finland, we have that which translates to Finnish meat pie, with a decent pastry crust recipe. So, at least we know that this will work. It ought to work. I mean, a chef put it together, for God's sake. Back to the States now with well, at least a version of chili con carne. It's quite a bit different from what people would do these days, considering there's entire association for chili. But we'll get into those books another day. Does look like at least a decent, if basic, recipe. Now for something very much out of the ordinary from Russia, here we have kurbyak of salmon. Okay, salmon in a brioche crust. Now what's interesting is that if those of you who watch the Life of Boris channel, he did do his recipe of something similar to this. What's interesting is that it is quite similar to this itself. Granted, he just used salmon and not sole in it, but still, I read the recipe enough times to know that this is it. So if you're a little apprehensive about following Boris's recipe, if you don't have his cookbook or weren't able to follow his recipe online, here's an analog version. Although, I'd have to double check to see if... And now for something I can do a little bit of a comparison of. Here we're from Russia, we have a kurbyak of salmon, or kurbyak, here in the Life of Boris cookbook. Now these recipes are roughly the same. Still, it's very interesting to see that a recipe for a Russian kurbyak during the Cold War existed at all in the States. That's got to count for something. Now for the Egyptian part of the book, we have menina, hot mousse of chicken and brains. Don't worry, it uses calf brains. Yay. Now for something a bit more traditionally French, we have coq au vin here. So there is at least a recipe for that if you are willing to take the time and effort to put that together. Moving on, from there we have our Algerian braised chicken with lemon and onion with its own recipe for pickled lemons. So if you don't want to shell out for pickled lemons, preserved lemons, here you go, if you really want to put in that effort. Next, from Italy, we have bollito misto, a mixed boiled meats and vegetables. So, yeah, nothing really surprising there. No guessing what you do either. But still, it's interesting that a recipe that is rather uncommon is in this book. Now, if you really want to get fancy with it, we have Ballantine de Canard Bourguignon, stuffed bone duck. Yeah, so if you want the most time-consuming recipe you could possibly find, here you go. Moving on to the vegetable section, we start in the States again with broccoli mousse, which includes half a cup of cream, milk, and 4 tablespoons of butter. So you might be able to fool somebody initially into thinking that it's healthier, but no. Next, from France, we have sautéed leeks with garlic. Again, sorry, I don't speak French. This does look to be a more calorie-conscious recipe to what we just saw, so there's an option for you. Next, in the salad section, from Indonesia, we have gado-gado, something described as an exotic salad with peanut sauce. Now, I've seen the ingredients here, and yeah, it just seems like it's something that you'd put on a very large tray and let people dig in, so. Now, the interesting is that I've seen several Travel Channel shows and I've never seen this mentioned, which means it's either served in very special restaurants or it just went out of fashion. Whichever you want to go with. Next, again, we have Morocco here with orange and radish salad, a rather light and unique take on a salad, but it does look at least easy to prepare. So that's something. Next up in the dessert section from France, we have one of the few words I can pronounce in French, dacquoise, thanks to B. Dylan Hawes. Now, dacquoise itself is a meringue cake with buttercream, which makes it sort of a mix of Napoleon and pavlova. So it's certainly going to be light tasting, but certainly not light on calories. Moving back to the States, we have Vatis bars, a recipe that seems to have been lost to time, but relatively easy to prepare. I don't quite get the use of hard-boiled egg yolks included in the recipe, but that's just me since I've never had it. Moving on to another part where we have crepes, both for the apple crepes from the United States and crepes Martinique, crepes with liquor, and from France. It just seemed appropriate to have a French recipe for crepes in here. From Spain, we have Andalusian oranges. No, I don't know what makes them Andalusian. It's probably just a local colloquialism. But the recipe is relatively simple. Finally, for the boozy bits, we have Zabaione gelato from Italy. Yes, it is. Just a gelato with a bunch of booze in it. And Grand Marnier soufflé. So if you want dessert with your liquor, here you go. At the back end of this book, we do have a mail order section for the ingredients that you may not be able to get normally. Although times have changed, so I imagine you can probably find a fair amount of this online or in your regular store anyway, except for the truffles. That one you're going to have a problem with no matter what, especially considering that they're coming from New Jersey. Now, I can't really comment on how easy it is to find this book. Like I said, this was a gift from a family friend, but I imagine eBay and Etsy probably has a few copies floating around out there. You can probably find them at secondhand stores pretty infrequently, but I do mention that they're there, and it will at least last better than the Brave Cookbook had, due to the fact that this is a much better quality paper on a metal binding. So it'll at least last. It might certainly last some abuse itself. I'm Deceptiwolf. This has been 100 of the World's Greatest Recipes by James Beard, presented by Benson & Hedges 100s, and I'll see you next time.